Peace and blessings, and welcome back to the Fully Flavored Business Podcast, where we skip the surface level BS and get to the real stories and conversations behind the founders and leaders who are building at a higher standard.
I'm Lace Flowers, and this is Sutton McCraney, and we are the co-founders of The Flavor Room, a curated leadership ecosystem for founders and CEOs of color.
Every guest episode, we sit down with leaders who said no thanks to the traditional playbook and built something meaningful in their own way.
Today's guest is CEO and founder Sacha Thompson, a leadership development strategist and executive coach who helps organizations build psychologically safe, high-performing workplace cultures. She is founder of The Equity Equation, host of successful podcast DEI After 5, which we were on very recently, and a trusted voice on human-centered leadership and workplace culture. Welcome to the pod, Sacha. It's an honor to speak with you again. How are you doing today?
I am doing wonderfully. Thank you both, Lace and Sutton. I'm so excited to be here with you all.
Well, we are honored and excited to have you. And just thank you again for having us as a guest on DEI After 5. We really appreciate that, the opportunity to come on your platform. And now you're with us today. And as I told you before we started, we really want to get into the work that you do. So could you please start by telling our listeners what you do?
Absolutely. So again, my name is Sacha Thompson. I am the founder of The Equity Equation. And when I started The Equity Equation several years ago, I really was focused on people that were doing inclusion work. And what I quickly came to discover was in order for them to be successful in the work that they do, they need to have willing participants. And so I was noticing that there were leaders that were excited, but not quite sure what to do or how to show up. And they were leaning so much on these culture curators or these inclusive workplace folks within their organizations that they were not mindful of how they were really showing up. And so we started pivoting our work to focus on psychological safety and how to create these more inclusive workplaces that leaders actually realize and understand that they are the ones that lead the culture. And so that's the work that we do right now is we really work with leaders at all levels. So first-time people leaders to C-suite, really helping them think about how they're showing up, how they're creating psychological safety for their teams, but also questioning how psychologically safe they are as well too. And I've noticed that when we do that and they have that internal work that's taking place, they then start to show up and be a bit more mindful of how they are working and showing up for the folks that are on their teams.
Thank you for that intro, Sacha, and just kind of giving us more insight into the work you do. And what I found really interesting about what you said is because it mirrors a conversation that Lace and I had very recently on the Rethink Leadership podcast with Jeremy Blaine. And that was that you have leaders that are still kind of in this 20th century mindset, if you will, kind of as a blanketed term. Yep. And what Jeremy was saying, that you have leaders that haven't fully stepped into what is needed and what is required to lead and to essentially perform in this modern era that we're in. What do you think about that? Do you think that there are certain things that are gaps with leaders now that they're not able to fill? Would love your insights.
Oh, absolutely. I think, there's this mindset, and I'll go back a few years. So when I was working on my first master's degree, which is in educational policy planning and leadership, all the leadership books that I read were older white males. And there was this very particular way that leadership looked. It was not quite sitting well with me back then. And this was like the late 90s that I was having those conversations. And then fast forward almost about 15 years when I was working on my MBA, same thing. It was, all of these leadership books, or what we're told is a leader, was this very much in the box type of thinking. But then fast forward to, okay, well, what are people seeing every day? The leaders that are in their communities, they don't necessarily follow the same mindset. And so especially after COVID, what I started noticing and what I started realizing is people were leaning onto these old systems, not realizing that there were humans in front of them, right? We had just now, as a community, engaged in something that really shifted all of us. And this human-centered leadership, it was really something that just kind of sat with me as, are we having leaders, or are leaders looking at people as humans? And how are they showing up? Are they just checking the box to say these are the things that leaders should do? Or are they really asking, what is it that you need, right? How can I best support you? What are the things that will help you be successful? And really diving into those questions. And what I realized is people are so uncomfortable with getting the answers, because that means that they actually have to show up in ways that don't force them to be in this check the box, right? I can be disconnected. I can just check and say, okay, I've done these things and my work is done. But what is now needed and from leaders is to show up as humans, to show up as people that make mistakes, as people that are in the trenches with the folks that you're working with. And so I think that that is the shift that we are seeing. But what I am also seeing is this fear, for lack of a better term, in showing up those ways, because one, it was never modeled to them before. And two, there is some documentation, there is some research behind it, but it's not as well known as those books that were written in the 50s, 60s, and 70s around leadership. And so what you're starting to see now is this evolution of leaders, and people are really trying to figure out what that means for them and how they need to show up. And a big part of that is that internal work of knowing who you are that sets the foundation for how you show up as a leader.
Wow, yeah, and I resonate with everything you've said. Typically with, these older, outdated forms of leadership, being in the military.
Oh gosh, yes.
What else do I need to say other than that? And
Yeah.
going through my MBA program as well, and seeing how this stuff is really, has dust and cobwebs on it. Like, why are we still teaching it? But
yeah,
yes, absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about inclusion, and what does that look like with the work you do specifically? And could you also go more into the psychological safety that real inclusion creates?
Yeah. So when I think about inclusion, I think about, does everyone that is a stakeholder in what is happening have a voice or a seat at the table? Even if they don't have a seat at the table, are we hearing their voices? Do they have some type of representation? Are we taking everything into consideration as we're making these decisions? And sometimes that's, are we doing focus groups? Are we, whatever it is, are we getting everyone's voices to be a part of this design or whatever it is that we're working on, right? And understanding that, you're not going to have every single voice, but if you know the communities that you're reaching and serving, is there some level of representation in that process? So when I think about psychological safety, I think about that inclusion piece. Now, if you look at Dr. Timothy Clark's work in the 4 stages of psychological safety, inclusion is that first level. It's, that very basic, people feel that they are part of what's happening. Do they feel that they're part of the organization? Do they feel that they are part of what is taking place? I've kind of shifted a little bit past Dr. Clark's work. And when I look at inclusion within the workplace, it's, do I feel valued? Do I feel that my voice matters here? And so what does that look like every single day? And I found that when people do feel psychologically safe, they feel that their voices are heard, that their voices matter, that they are valued as part of the process. But they also understand, I'm not going to be in every single piece of what's happening, but I know that my worth is something that matters here. And so when we think about inclusion from that psychologically safe space, I feel that I am a part of this larger culture, and that I can contribute in meaningful ways, and I can push back, and I can challenge the status quo, and feel that, again, my voice is valued, that my experience is valued. And so that's what we're looking for. And it's not just at that organizational level. It is, do I feel this way with my colleagues? Do I feel this way with folks on other teams as well, too? And so when we do work around psychological safety, we're looking at it from all of those aspects and making sure that people feel that their voices are valued and they know and understand what the worth that they bring to the organization.
So what kind of cultural shifts does an organization need to make in order for their organization members to feel included?
That's a great question. And I think it is one that really depends on the organization. So one of the first things that I ask when I'm working with leaders or coming into an organization is I'm like, what are your values? What are the things that you say are the driving forces, the quote unquote North Star for your organization? And so of course you get the PR response of, our mission is this, our values are this, these are the things, whatever it is. The next question that I ask is, okay, so what does that look like every single day? Right? How do I know that I'm experiencing that in my everyday interactions? And that's usually where people get tripped up, because it's like, oh, well, it's supposed to be aspirational. Well, if it's aspirational, there should be a path to get there, right? So what does that look like? How do we make sure that there's alignment with that? Or if you're falling away from that, how do you get back on track? And I think that's the piece that so many organizations are missing. There's a disconnect between the values and all of these wonderful aspirational, what I call, what's written on the cafeteria wall, and what people are experiencing every single day. And so when we talk about culture, I'm like, the culture is not that. The culture is that everyday experience. And so having them align, where are the gaps? Where do we make this so abstract that it sounds great and we hold people to this, but at the same time, are we holding people to this? Is everyone even using the same definition, right? So that we can make sure that we're in alignment. Because if I say this is an organization of trust, right? Trust means something very different to different people. And so if we have different definitions and different expectations, then we're not going to be a trustworthy organization, because there's no commonality in how we're defining that. So I think that's one of the first things that I will work with organizations to do, is like, let's see where those gaps are, so that we can then get to a place where when we're talking about inclusion, we're all on the same page. We all have the same expectations, and we now know what it takes to get there, because we've all kind of figured out this journey and this path together.
That can be very uncomfortable, for an organization to kind of have that light shed on
that mirror.
Right. They're aspirational, sweet words and everything. So what do you find working with clients? Is there some resistance there? What does that look like?
So I think it's less resistance. It's less about resistance than it is the ability to kind of see that yourself in the mirror, like reflection. Because sometimes that's very difficult to swallow. And I try to do it in a way where it's like, this isn't the end of the world, right? This is a reflection of where you are right now in this moment in time. Do you want to change that? Do you want to shift this? Okay, let's do the work. And I do so in partnership. I'm never going to say, yep, here's the stuff, figure it out yourself, go forth and conquer. It's okay, how can we do this in partnership? How can we do this in community? And I try to model that behavior, because that's the other thing around the workplace is, it's so built on this, and I'll say it, supremacy mindset of rugged individualism. And we have to do it on our own, and we have to figure it out and pull ourselves up by the bootstrap. If you operate in community, you're never alone. And so how do you do this as a community? How do we as a collective move toward making this a better experience for everyone? And so there's a level of vulnerability. There's a level of internal conversation that needs to take place, right? Are you willing to change? Are you willing to show up differently? And if you're not, then what is the point of what we're doing, right? So it's a lot of that. And so that's where a lot of the coaching comes in. There's a lot of small group conversations sometimes where things come out that you're not necessarily going to be comfortable with. And it's not about you not being comfortable. It's how do you sit in that discomfort and learn to get past that discomfort? Because there's nothing about discomfort in these types of situations that is going to lock you into that place, right? You have to be willing to stay in that place of discomfort. Or if you're going to ignore it, right, nothing else is going to change. So it really is about the guidance. It's about the process. It's about community, but it's also the willingness to be coached and the willingness to want to do better. And I think once leaders have that mindset of, I thought I was perfect, I know I'm not perfect, but I'm willing to do better and to shift and to change, that's where we start to get out of those uncomfortable situations.
Absolutely. And I'm really curious, when clients come to work with you, what are the things that they're experiencing, like the symptoms they're seeing that they say, oh my gosh, I need to work with Sacha to, get this fixed in my organization?
It really, really depends. I have a couple of clients where there's a disconnect between their leadership tiers, and I'll say it that way, and their staff, their individual contributors, or those that may not be in a managing a people leader type role yet. So I've seen those things where there's just a disconnect and expectations are different. I have some where the middle managers really feel like they're in that messy middle, and they're trying to please both the staff and leadership and not quite sure what to do, especially if the decisions that are being made don't necessarily align with their beliefs or what they've experienced. And so again, it's about communication. So when we talk about psychological safety, one of the things that come up is people often don't say, I don't feel psychologically safe. I don't trust leadership. There's bad communication around here. I don't feel like I'm valued or included. Those are the things that people say. So, I see all of those things. I have clients that are really trying to change the culture or trying to make the organizations more psychologically safe. And so what we end up doing is we work with leadership first, and we measure their psychological safety. Because I often will tell them, if you all don't feel psychologically safe, it trickles down. Like no one else in the staff is going to feel psychologically safe, because you have to be aware of the shadow that you cast. And so typically we'll do that kind of unpacking with leadership. So it's organizations that really want to do more work around psychological safety, but it's not just a training on psychological safety. It's going through the evolution themselves and understanding how they're showing up in these spaces so that they can then start to create what I call these cultures of care, where they can show up more authentically with the folks on their teams and start to really build more psychologically safe teams. So those are the types of organizations that I work with. There's not really one industry that I work with. I have a legal aid group that I'm working with right now. I have a membership organization I'm working with right now. I've worked with healthcare systems, a cancer center. I've worked across the music industry. So it really is, across the gamut. But all of them have some of the same challenges. And it really is leadership getting out of their own way and understanding that they need to feel psychologically safe themselves before they can create environments of psychological safety for their teams.
What I really love about your work is the depth that's involved. Honestly, this is the real work, that's often just skipped, because it is the real work. It requires you to get your hands dirty and be honest with yourself about where you're at and how you've been, performing.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you specifically when it comes to diversity, right? And the equity piece, the D and the E.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like with your work now that we've seen some shifts, if you will, when it comes to what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, particularly in the United States? So what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that kind of in two different ways. So through the equity equation, we actually shifted away from, the DEI words, terminology, and focus on what are the outcomes, right? So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what are the outcomes that we want to see when we create these more inclusive workplaces? And so a big part of that is, are we modeling the behavior that we want to see? Are we creating environments that are inclusive, right? Are we finding ways to remove barriers or provide support as needed? So we really believe in, how do you model the behavior so that it's not something that's, again, a check the box. This is just how we operate. So I do it that way, and I call it sneaking in the vegetables as well too. So when I'm doing my work around inclusion, when I'm doing presentations, you will notice that I have, even in using pictures, there's diversity in the photographs. right? I try to, again, model the behavior and say, you know what, this isn't just checking the box. This is a part of who we are and how we show up. And it is very intentional in the way that we do this. It's not something that we're not responding to a mandate, or we're not being forced to do that. This is just who we are. So I think that's a big part of it. Now, on the other side, as you mentioned, I have a podcast, DEI After 5. I made the conscious decision to keep the name DEI After 5 because I wanted two things. One, I'm not going to be scared into, oh, DEI is bad. It absolutely is not bad. And so I'm not going to falter, or I'm not going to shift because the current administration thinks that DEI is bad, where I think they're absolutely showing the opposite of that unintentionally and through their actions. The other part of that is we're really leaning into the After 5 piece, where so many people had this mindset like DEI was this mandate for the corporate workspace. And so we are stepping beyond that. Yes, there are policies and procedures that are in place to create more inclusive, more diverse workplaces. However, a lot of how we live our lives and how we operate is after 5 o'clock, right? It's that after 5 piece. And so this is how we live our lives. So, I have someone that did an episode not too long ago talking about what happened at the BAFTAs. And I had 2 therapists come on because I wanted to talk about the intersection of disability and race, right? Because there was this whole thing around Tourette's that I was seeing. And when people of color, particularly Black people were talking about their experiences with Tourette's as the Black person, right? They were being attacked and saying, oh, well, you're siding with this white man. And they were like, but we have Tourette's. So I wanted to have a conversation around that intersection because I think it's so critical. And it's not you pick or choose which identity that you want to be a part of. It is, how do we show up holistically in these spaces and the diversity within our different communities. So that's just kind of one example. I have someone talking about autism. We've had, people on the show talking about autism, which really, touches me because both of my boys are on the spectrum. And so it's having these conversations that, I do have to live and operate in a space around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I may not necessarily realize it because it's outside of the workplace. So I know that was a long answer to your question, but I'm looking at it kind of from both perspectives.
No, I love that. And that was actually going to be my next question, to tell us more about the podcast. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I know you have something that you just came out recently. I think it's a journal.
Yes, I thought I had one around here, but yes. So it actually was birthed out of the podcast. So the first, 8 seasons or so, one of the questions, the last question I asked all of my guests was, what do you do to fill your cup? And I did so intentionally because when I first started the equity equation, like I said, I was really focusing on practitioners. And what I was seeing through the practitioners that I was coaching was they were so focused on everyone else and they weren't taking the time to take care of themselves. And so when I would have folks on the show and ask that question, it was a really great opportunity, one, for them to kind of focus on themselves and like, what is it that I do to fill my cup? And we've had some great responses. And so the journal is 101 Ways to Fill Your Cup. It is pulled directly from guests that were on the show, the ways that they fill their cup. I also include a prompt in there. There's some journaling that can happen in there as well too. But the whole idea is to take those moments to figure out, how are you focusing on you so that you are constantly filling your cup and then you're giving from your overflow. So doing so that we're not getting to these places where we're absolutely burnt out, or that, we're so exhausted from giving to so many other people and we're depleted that we can't even take care of ourselves. So the whole idea of 101 Ways to Fill Your Cup really is about taking those small moments to do what you need to do in order to take care of you.
And this ties directly into what you said earlier about making sure that you are practicing what you're putting out there into the world.
Absolutely.
So, and how can everyone get a hold of this journal?
Absolutely. They can go to my website, www.theequityequationllc.com. You'll find it right there at the bottom. Or you can go to our resources page, and it's there, as well as a ton of other resources around psychological safety and anything that you want to do with your teams. And you can also just find me on social media, and I'll send you the link directly too. But and you can also go to tinyurl.com/fill-your-cup-journal, and you can get it directly there as well too.
I love that, Sacha. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
What do you do to fill your cup?
Oh, goodness. Especially this time of year. So I absolutely love sitting outside, right? Somewhat this year because season allergies and all that other stuff. But I love being just outside in the backyard, just taking in nature. We live in an area that's pretty quiet. And so just listening to nature is something that I love. When I am able to get to my mom in Barbados, going to the beach every morning and just, I just feel like the ocean is very therapeutic. And so a good way to just start my day is doing that. And I also listen to ebooks. I'm just walking around the house often, and it's not stuff that is I don't want to say valuable. It's like rom-coms and those types of things that just kind of take me away into other places. And I'm like, oh yeah, that was funny, but I can shut it off when I need to. So those are the things that I do. I love comedy. So watching, The Neighborhood or Psych or someone, any of those shows that are just silly laughs, I absolutely love to. And those are the things that truly fill my cup.
I love that. I love the outside too. My next goal is to get a balcony so I can actually sit outside and have somewhere a bit quieter. I'm still in quite a noisy place, and the ocean up there as well. Up there. Love that your mum lives in Barbados because it's such a beautiful place as well. I've only been once, but stunning.
Come on back. I try to go every year. And every time I go, it is more difficult to get back on the plane to come back. So yeah, that's my happy place.
Beautiful. And I just love everything that you shared with us today. There's so many parallels between what you do and what we do. And it's really made me think about a lot of stuff. Like when you were talking about the pretty words, we've seen so much of the pretty words. Oh, we're inclusive, we're aligned, everybody is welcome, and all that good stuff. But then when you talk about, are you actually modeling that when you go to the websites, when you go and look at the lineups? It's like, I'm seeing the words, I'm hearing the words, but I'm not quite seeing that match up in real life. Seeing that a lot. And that's really where it's important to make sure that the words are backed up by actual action.
And what actually got me thinking about that? It was before I even started my company, was in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, and when all of these companies had like the, social media, the black box, and it's like, Black Lives Matter. And at the time I was in a corporate role, but I was very connected to other organizations. And what I was hearing from Black employees was, no, they don't. And so again, that was the disconnect. And so for me, this is the performative stuff, right? It's a PR ploy. It's like, oh, yep, we're doing it. Let's put our box up. And so when I kind of took that into this work of, if I was to pull a random staffer from your organization and ask questions that spoke to what you all say are your values, would they say that that's their experience? And that started to, I don't say scare some leaders, because, they're so used to, this is the elevator pitch, but the people that are working in the front lines, the people that are doing the work every single day aren't going to come at you with the elevator pitch, right? They're going to talk about what they've experienced. And so to me, that was the heart of the matter. If there's not alignment there, then no one's going to be psychologically safe. No one's going to feel that organization truly values who they are. It's just a marketing ploy. So yeah, I think that, I'm sure you all are seeing it. It is not something that is unique to one industry by any stretch of the imagination. It is across the board.
No, we became a trend for a little while, didn't we? We were trending and then we weren't. Then no one
right. Exactly. Oh, we were popular. And then The Smurfs came, but that's a whole other story.
I was just about to say that's a whole other conversation, but just to comment quickly, you know, that is the testament to leadership. That is why you have to be involved with your people, with your organization, because as you said, it does come from the top down. So if you were to pull a random, employee and they're like, yeah, no, they ain't about this life. That's a direct reflection of you. And again, because of the way that things are set up, there's all this focus on how do we get to that objective, i.e., hitting our financial goals, which is great, but everyone loses sight of how you hit those financial goals. If you have a team that feels psychologically safe, they trust, they're loyal. All these companies talk about loyalty, right? This is how you build it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Innovation happens when there's psychological safety, right? People will share their ideas. People will think outside the box when there's psychological safety. If they're in an environment that is not psychologically safe for them, the greatest example is like, I'm not going to give you my best ideas. Like I'm just going to do the job. I'm going to give you bare minimum to get my paycheck. And for you all to say, yeah, I'm doing the work, but I'm not going to go above and beyond. And so that psychological safety is what what encourages people to go above and beyond because they want to show up. They feel a part of the success, right? And so that's the piece that I think organizations and leaders need to realize. If you invest in the people that you have and you do so in an authentic way, they're going to take you to places you would never experience. But you have to trust that you've hired the best, right? In order to do that and not just to have butts in seats. And so that's a big part of this whole conversation. And the other piece, based on what you were just saying too, is yes, they're talking about the financials, but the cost to replace an employee is much greater than to keep somebody and invest in them. So again, when they're looking at the financials, the turnover, all these companies now that are laying off all of these folks and then having to turn around 2-3 months later to rehire, that's red line. Like that's just red on the bottom line. You could have done so much more if you were people centered and really understood the value that people brought to the table and how you were doing your organizing. That shows to me that's better leadership than, oh yeah, we're going to lay off 30,000 people and then quietly hire back 10,000. Right.
To me, and I know to you, it's common sense. These are not, radical things to think about. It's common sense and honestly just good business and leadership. But I digress.
Sasha, common sense ain't all that common. So
it isn't.
Yeah.
Sasha, we thank you so much for being with us here today. And before we close out, what's on the horizon for DEI after 5? What's on the horizon for the equity equation? We want to know everything that's coming up for you and how our listeners can stay in touch.
Absolutely. So for DEI after 5, we are continuing these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly after 5. So we have some great guests coming up. I'm just really excited because we're going to industries we've never touched before, in ways we've never touched before. So I'm very excited about the progression there. For the equity equation, we are continuing to do what we call these leadership culture labs, where we're focusing on leaders so that they have those aha moments and then allow them to be able to show up better for their teams. And the other thing that is just about to come out, the 101 Ways to Fill Your Cup, we're actually creating that to be a part of leadership retreats, where we do a session based on the journal and allowing leaders that time to really focus on themselves and filling their cups so that they can give from their overflow, especially in times like this where everything is very stressful. Everything is kind of moving in a million different directions. We want to allow organizations to set that time aside. So if anyone's doing any leadership retreats or anything focused on their leaders, this is a great opportunity to help get them centered, and they'll walk away with a great resource as well. So that's kind of all the things we're doing right now.
It's all brilliant and needed. And congratulations on all of that. I know it's going to be phenomenal and help a lot of leaders. So again, we appreciate your time today, Sacha. And Lace, do you have anything?
I'm just like, oh my gosh, retreats. Want information on that. So that sounds so exciting. But again, thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think there's a part 2 in here somewhere. So we might have to come back and then go again. But that's all for this week. So thank you everyone for listening. Go ahead and book a connection call with myself and Sutton at www.theflavor.biz. Listen in, binge it all, and we will speak to you soon again next week.